The bank's door slid open with a soft whoosh, and Marcus Henderson glided in on his sleek electric wheelchair. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, throwing golden rectangles onto the polished marble floor. It was the kind of Tuesday when the week felt both heavy and hopeful. The work week still had 2 days to go, but the weekend holiday hovered just beyond the horizon. Marcus inhaled the scent of fresh coffee from the little cafe kiosk near the entrance, and the faint musk of paper and printer toner that clung to walls lined with brochures. He had visited this branch countless times over the years. To him, it was a place of routine, a backdrop to the small, everyday moments that made up life. Depositing his paycheck, checking on his savings, buying stamps sometimes, or simply greeting the staff with a familiar smile. Today, though, something felt different. Even before he reached the counter, he sensed a slight shift in the usual hum of activity. The tellers, who normally greeted him with warm nods and hurried hellos, paused, mid-transaction to glance over. One woman in a crisp white blouse turned, her pen suspended in midair. A man counting out bills behind Marcus froze with a faint frown. There was a tension in the air, almost imperceptible, like the crackle of static before a storm breaks. Marcus noted it but pushed it aside with the practiced calm that had served him well for decades. He hadn't come to change the weather. He had come to bank. He navigated the slight incline of the marble floor, his back straight, eyes forward. His wheelchair's electric motor hummed softly, a gentle whir that blended with the murmur of voices. He passed the row of chairs where customers often waited. An elderly gentleman read a newspaper, glasses perched at the tip of his nose. A young woman tapped away on her phone, earbuds in, oblivious to the world. A child sat with his mother clutching a toy car. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just the collage of lives intersecting in this common space. When Marcus reached the line, he found himself at the end of a short queue. Only 2 people stood ahead, a middle-aged woman fussing with her purse and a younger man in a business suit checking his watch impatiently. Marcus straightened his shoulders, offering the woman a polite nod as he settled in. The man in the suit glanced up, frowned at the wheelchair, then looked away. The woman smiled at Marcus kindly, and he returned it with a gentle lift of his chin. These little exchanges were simple acts of human connection, reminders that respect often came as easily as courtesy. The ambient noise of typing keys, printer reels, and distant phone rings was punctuated by occasional murmurs of conversation. A teller at the far end laughed softly at something her colleague said. A security guard at the door chatted quietly with a visitor. All around, the bank was alive with ordinary sounds and faces. Marcus watched it all with a calm intensity. He had learned long ago that moments of tension began as tiny ripples. Today, he sensed those ripples but had no reason yet to expect a tidal wave. Finally, the line moved. The suited man stepped forward, placed his file folder on the counter, and began explaining his business in clipped, hurried tones. Marcus listened from behind, only half paying attention. His mind wandered to the community meeting he would attend later that evening, where he was slated to speak about accessibility improvements in local public spaces. He considered the points he wanted to raise: curb cuts that remained clogged by trash, ramps whose rails were loose, sidewalks whose uneven bricks posed a hazard. He thought about how, despite progress, there was always more work to be done. These reflections were second nature to him, after years of advocating for others with mobility challenges. His thoughts were interrupted when the suited man finished his transaction. The teller handed him a receipt with a polite "thank you," and he walked away, adjusting his tie. The woman with the purse had joined the suited man at the counter for a moment of confusion about her account. The teller patiently explained, smiling, and the woman departed looking relieved. With both customers finished, there was a brief lull, the kind that feels like the calm after the tide goes out. Marcus moved forward. He positioned his wheelchair parallel to the counter, leaning in slightly as he greeted the teller. Sarah Donovan. He did not know her well, but he had seen her before. She was the newest addition to the team, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and a name badge that gleamed, Sarah. Her uniform was crisp, her posture professional. As he settled in, she lifted her gaze from the computer screen. For a moment, Her expression was polite interest. She glanced at his account name, typed something, then looked up again. But in that second look, something changed. Maybe it was the way her eyes flicked briefly over his wheelchair rather than at his face. Maybe it was the slight downturn of her lips before she forced a tight smile. Whatever it was, Marcus felt the shift like a pinprick in his skin. He had encountered prejudice before, but usually it was buried under layers of politeness. This felt different, more sneering, more deliberate. "Good afternoon," Sarah said, her tone neutral. "How can I help you today?" Marcus returned her greeting with calm warmth. "Good afternoon. I'd like to make a deposit, please," he said. He handed her the sealed envelope containing a check. Sarah accepted it, her fingers brushing against his hand for a fraction of a second. Marcus noticed she did not withdraw with the courtesy one usually shows when touching someone in a wheelchair. Instead, she stared down at the envelope, then up at him, her gaze cool. She keyed in the deposit, her movements efficient but impersonal. The fluorescent lights overhead glinted off her hair. Marcus watched as her fingers hovered over the keys, then began punching in numbers. He kept his posture relaxed, arms resting lightly on the armrests of his chair, head held high. From the corner of his eye, he saw a young teller across the room glance over, then look back at her paperwork. He heard muffled whispers from another customer who, behind a magazine, peeked at the scene unfolding. Sarah finished the entry, printed a slip, and slid it across the counter without making eye contact. Marcus reached for it, but before his hand touched the paper, Sarah cleared her throat. The small crowded space around them seemed to tilt as everybody in that area noticed the same thing, a tension stronger than routine business. Sarah leaned in closer, so close that Marcus could hear her breath hitch ever so slightly. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, but loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Which refugee camp did you escape from?" she said, the words dripping with contempt. Time seemed to freeze. The quiet click of a pen in the background echoed like a drumbeat. Marcus's breath caught. His hand hovered over the printed slip. He looked up at her, surprised. He expected an apology, a quick retraction. Anything to undo the moment. But Sarah's lips curled into a mocking smile, and she waited, as though her words had been clever. Marcus let the silence stretch for a heartbeat. 2. He let the astonishment register on his face. Customers around them shifted uncomfortably. An elderly woman in the next chair peered over her knitting needles. A young man at the counter to the left looked up from his phone, eyebrows raised. The teller behind Sarah paused in her work, eyes widening ever so slightly. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady despite the sting. "I'm not from a refugee camp," he said. His words were simple, clear, without anger. Yet everyone could sense the strength behind them. He tilted his head slightly, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. "I'm a lifelong citizen, and I've been coming to this branch for years." Sarah's smile faltered. She blinked rapidly, her face flushing. The envelope in her hand went still as the usual rhythm of transactions around them slowed, like a record catching on a scratch. Marcus felt a mixture of cold fury and dismay rise in his chest, but he kept his voice composed. Little did he know that this moment would mark the beginning of a profound shift, for himself, for Sarah, and for everyone who witnessed what happened next. For now, though, all the bank heard was the sharp truth of his words and the sudden realization that kindness could be weaponized in the calmest of voices. Sarah's mocking question hung in the air like a sudden chill. For a moment, everything felt suspended. The gentle hum of the air conditioner, the soft tapping of computer keys, even the distant clink of coins in a counting tray. All these everyday sounds faded into silence. Marcus waited, calm but alert, his heart beating steadily. He had faced prejudice before, but rarely so baldly and in public view. The other customers turned toward them, their faces showing surprise and discomfort. A hush fell over the queue. The elderly woman reading her newspaper lowered it slowly, her eyes widening. The young man with the earbuds peeked over his phone, one earbud now dangling as he tried to catch more of what was happening. The security guard at the entrance straightened, as if ready to step in. Even the bank's background music, a gentle instrumental piece, seemed oddly loud now, filling the empty space between Sarah's cruel words and Marcus's response. Sarah leaned back, crossing her arms with a smug expression. She met Marcus's steady gaze and waited for the furor she expected. Nearby, another teller paused in her own work. She held a stack of deposit slips, her pencil poised, but she dared not move. It was as if Sarah's voice had cast a spell, freezing everyone in place. Marcus's mind raced back to moments of frustration when he'd faced microaggressions, those subtle slights people often made without thinking. But this was different. This was deliberate. This was meant to wound. Marcus inhaled slowly, letting his calmness anchor him. He knew that reacting with anger might only feed Sarah's cruelty. He chose a different path. His voice was gentle, clear, and controlled. "I'm sorry, could you please repeat what you just said?" he asked. His words carried no accusation, only a quiet insistence that she clarify her meaning. The effect was immediate. Sarah's confident smirk faltered. For a split second, she looked uncertain. Her smooth defenses cracked. Then she leaned forward, again lowering her voice even more. "I asked which refugee camp you escaped from," she sneered, emphasizing the word escaped, as though to underline how ridiculous she thought his presence in a wheelchair seemed. She slowed her speech, savoring each syllable, enjoying the attention the rude comment brought. A few patrons shifted uneasily in their seats, uncomfortable at being drawn into someone else's cruelty. Another teller glanced up, concern etched on her face, but she didn't intervene. The woman with the purse had returned to her seat, clutching her bag tightly. The middle-aged man who had been waiting behind Marcus now stood closer, clearly upset. His brow furrowed as he watched Sarah's display. Marcus noticed these small signs of solidarity, and it gave him a quiet strength. Sarah waited for Marcus to react. She expected anger, or tears, or at least embarrassment. Instead, Marcus tilted his head slightly and met her eyes. His face was calm, almost serene. "That question is inappropriate," he said softly. His tone still carried no hostility, only a firm statement of fact. The words cut through the tension. Some of the onlookers exhaled as if they had been holding their breath. Marcus continued, speaking calmly enough that everyone in the vicinity could hear. "I am not from a refugee camp. I am a citizen like you, and I have every right to be here." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A few heads nodded in agreement. The bank's background music shifted, from unfamiliar notes of a piano to something more lively, as if the world outside had resumed its pace. Sarah blinked rapidly, her mouth opening slightly before she closed it again. Her professional composure evaporated in an instant. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the counter. She had expected authority over Marcus, but instead, she was confronted with someone who refused to be cowed. She took a shaky breath, trying to gather herself. She tapped a button on her computer as if searching for an escape. Marcus did not press his advantage. He folded his hands on the counter, maintaining that same quiet strength. He imagined the community center where he volunteered, helping others find their voices. He thought about the freedom he felt when he spoke there, among friends who respected and valued him. This moment, though painful, was another stage in that journey, an opportunity to stand firm in the face of prejudice. Around them, other customers began to react more openly. The man who had been waiting stepped forward slightly and muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Another customer cleared her throat loudly, a polite but unmistakable cue. The bank manager, who had been standing at the far end of the room, looked up and started walking in their direction. Even the security guard moved toward the counter, his stance alert but measured. Sarah's face flushed a deep red. Her breathing became rapid, her earlier confidence replaced by panic. She realized now how wrong she had been. Her job depended on serving customers with respect, not mocking them. Her manager was almost upon her. She had only seconds to correct the situation, but the words stuck in her throat. She opened her mouth, but no apology came out. She looked to the manager, eyes wide, silently pleading for a reprieve she did not deserve. Marcus saw the manager approaching, recognized him from previous visits. He held out the deposit slip that Sarah had printed earlier, his hands steady. "I'd like to officially make this deposit and also file a complaint about your staff members' behavior," he said in a tone so calm that it contrasted sharply with the storm she had tried to create. The manager snapped to attention, his face registering shock as he read Marcus's words. The manager introduced himself, Mr. Patel, his voice polite but firm. He asked Sarah to step aside while he spoke with Marcus privately. Sarah, still, rattled, complied. As they moved toward a quiet corner of the branch, the other customers resumed their own affairs, their polite murmurs and transactions offering a comforting return to normalcy. The teller who had watched silently earlier offered Marcus a sympathetic nod. The suited businessman, previously impatient, paused to ask Marcus if he needed any assistance. Sarah stood with her shoulders hunched, suddenly small and vulnerable. Marcus observed her not with triumph but with measured compassion. He knew that people made mistakes, but they needed to be held accountable for them. As Mr. Patel and Marcus spoke in low tones, Sarah listened, her face ashen. The hushed conversation marked a turning point. She realized how badly she had erred, how she had hurt not only Marcus but also her own reputation and dignity. At the counter again, the whir of the motor in Marcus's chair felt comforting, a reminder that he moved through life with both purpose and support. The words he had spoken carried weight, and he could almost feel the change in the atmosphere. What had begun as a simple banking errand had transformed into a moment of confrontation and learning. In the following minutes, actions would follow. Words. Apologies would be asked, reports written, and consequences faced. But in this pause, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. His calm response had shifted the balance, revealing that dignity and restraint could disarm even the most thoughtless cruelty. And in that pocket of time, he felt stronger than ever before. You. Marcus watched as Mr. Patel guided Sarah to a small office just off the main banking hall. He returned to the counter and completed his deposit with the other teller's quiet efficiency. Yet his mind was still tuned to the tense energy he had disrupted moments before. He remembered the sting of Sarah's question, and he knew that what happened next would shape not only her future, but the unspoken rules of respect in this branch. Within minutes, Marcus received a call from the bank's legal department asking him to provide a written statement. He agreed immediately and asked whether he could meet in person. The representative, Ms. Rodriguez, thanked him and offered to send someone to his community center later that afternoon. Marcus felt a flicker of relief. He believed in fairness and he wanted his account of events to stand on its own, free of misinterpretation. He prepared to articulate his experience clearly and calmly, just as he had at the counter. Meanwhile, Sarah sat alone in the small office, her uniform still crisp but her composure in tatters. Mr. Patel had left her there to reflect, and she stared at the blank walls, her heart pounding. She realized she had acted on impulse, letting a sneering thought slip out before she could filter it. She thought of the look on Marcus's face, hurt, but dignified, and felt a deep regret. She tried to replay the moment in her mind, searching for the point where she had gone wrong. The answer was simple. She had allowed a cruel assumption to overshadow her professionalism. Now she faced the gravest consequence of her career. Across town at the community center, Marcus set up his notes for the evening's meeting. He served on the board for the local disability advocacy group, and tonight he was to speak about accessibility in public spaces. His afternoon had already been more eventful than he'd planned, yet he knew the stories he shared here could help prevent future incidents like the one at the bank. He arranged his papers in neat piles, scribbling reminders to mention curb cuts, public transit lifts, and inclusive design in playgrounds. His wheelchair hummed quietly beneath him as he practiced his opening lines. He spoke with the same clarity he had used at the bank, calm, factual, but infused with an unshakable confidence. Back at Unity Trust Bank, word of the incident spread swiftly. A handful of customers who had witnessed the confrontation filed informal comments in the branch's suggestion box, expressing support for Marcus and disappointment in Sarah. One customer even posted a note on the bank's community board praising Marcus's dignity and urging the bank to take action. The internal email chain buzzed with concern. Regional managers conferred, deciding that a formal review was essential. They needed to demonstrate that Unity Trust Bank upheld its values of respect and inclusion. By late afternoon, Marcus received a polite email invitation to meet with the bank's regional diversity officer, Mr. Lee. He responded with thanks and agreed to come in the next morning. He closed his laptop and prepared to head to the community center. On his way, he reflected on how a single moment of courage could ripple outward. He remembered children he had mentored, showing them that self-respect and patience were powerful tools against prejudice. He thought of the elderly neighbors who had helped him clear snow from his ramp, and how community strength relied on simple acts of respect. As he wheeled through the neighborhood streets, the sun warmed his face and he felt a quiet satisfaction. He was turning an ugly moment into lasting progress. That evening, the community center's main hall filled quickly. Dozens of people gathered in folding chairs, leaning forward with anticipation. Marcus took his place at the front, his notes set aside. Instead of diving straight into technical details, he began with the story of his bank visit. He described the bright lights and smooth marble floors of the branch, the humming equipment, the routine transactions, then Sarah's cruel question and the stunned silence that followed. He spoke of the hush among customers, the manager's swift action and his own calm response. He emphasized how, despite feeling wounded, he chose to remain composed and factual. The audience listened in rapt attention. Some nodded, others took notes. He drew parallels between his experience and the broader barriers people with disabilities face daily. After his talk, the room erupted with applause. A mother approached him and said she would use her local PTA to push for accessible playgrounds. A young architect offered to volunteer time to assess curb cuts in the neighborhood. A local journalist asked to interview him about the bank incident. Marcus realized that by sharing his personal ordeal, he had energized this group to take collective action. He felt humbled by their solidarity. What had begun as a personal affront had become a catalyst for wide-ranging community improvements. Next morning, Marcus arrived at the bank for his meeting with Mr. Lee. He found the office quiet and welcoming, with a small desk piled with company literature on inclusion policies. Mr. Lee greeted him warmly, thanked him for coming, and invited him to sit. He explained that the bank had already placed Sarah on immediate leave and was launching a mandatory training program for all staff on unconscious bias and customer service with dignity. He asked Marcus for suggestions, and Marcus recommended role-playing scenarios where employees practice responding respectfully to diverse customers. He also suggested posting visible statements in branches affirming the bank's commitment to respect. Mr. Lee took notes eagerly, promising to implement every recommendation. Before leaving, Marcus received a formal apology letter signed by the CEO, acknowledging the incident and promising transparency in the review process. It arrived later by mail, along with a gift card and an invitation to attend a bank-hosted diversity workshop as a guest speaker. Marcus accepted graciously, knowing that real progress required collaboration. He understood that while Sarah's careless words had hurt him, the bank's swift corrective actions could lead to meaningful change for thousands of customers. Over the following weeks, local news outlets picked up the story. Reporters highlighted how Marcus's calm strength had confronted prejudice and inspired swift reform. Social media posts circulated widely, praising his dignity and condemning the teller's ignorance. Unity Trust Bank updated its training manuals, and branch managers across the region shared Marcus's story as a case study. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself the subject of an internal review that would determine whether she could ever return to customer service. She later reached out to Marcus through an intermediary, offering a sincere apology and asking how she could learn from her mistake. Marcus replied that genuine change began with listening and understanding, and he recommended several educational resources on diversity and inclusion. In the end, what began as a moment of cruelty became a turning point for an entire organization and community. Marcus's measured response proved that dignity could disarm prejudice, and his willingness to engage transformed a painful encounter into an opportunity for growth. As he continued his work at the community center and in meetings with the bank, he carried forward the lesson that respect was not merely a courtesy, but a fundamental right. And because he stood firm with calm resolve, Unity Trust Bank discovered that true leadership meant owning mistakes, learning from them, and working together to build a more inclusive world. The news of what happened at Unity Trust Bank spread quickly through the community. Within hours of Marcus's meeting with the regional diversity officer, a public statement appeared on the bank's website. It began by acknowledging the incident. The hurtful, thoughtless remark made by a staff member toward a respected customer. The statement expressed sincere regret, assuring the community that such behavior betrayed the bank's core values. It went on to describe immediate actions. The teller in question had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and mandatory training sessions on bias awareness and customer respect would be rolled out at every branch. Marcus read the statement himself and felt a quiet sense of vindication. He believed in accountability, and it was clear the bank was taking his complaint seriously. In the very same branch where the incident began, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. Regular customers arriving at the downtown location encountered new signs near the entrance. Our commitment to respect and inclusion, and your dignity matters here. The bank had also arranged for a local advocacy group to hold a small, open forum in the lobby, inviting anyone with questions or concerns to come and speak. Volunteers set up folding chairs in a clear circle, with refreshments on a side table. Even the security guard looked more approachable, offering warm greetings rather than merely keeping watch. Inside, Sarah Donovan's fate was unfolding at headquarters. The Human Resources Department had collected statements from customers, colleagues, and security staff. They had watched the brief but telling security footage, which showed her mocking gesture and Marcus's composed reaction. In each recording, the bank manager had moved quickly to de-escalate the situation. There was no question in HR's mind that Sarah had violated the bank's code of conduct. She had stepped outside her professional role and inflicted needless harm. Within 2 days, the official letter arrived. Her employment was terminated for gross misconduct. The letter noted that Unity Trust Bank upheld a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and that Sarah's actions left no alternative. It invited her to engage in an exit interview if she wanted to share her perspective, but it made clear her career with the bank had ended. Back at the community center that Marcus helped run, talk of these developments energized the group. Volunteers passed around copies of the bank's statement and the new lobby signage. They congratulated Marcus on his perseverance and the bank's swift response. Some suggested writing to other local businesses, urging them to adopt similar policies. Others wanted to organize a workshop on respectful customer service open to anyone interested. Marcus smiled as he listened. What had begun as a moment of personal insult had grown into a catalyst for broader change. He felt both humble and confident. His calm insistence on dignity had shown what was possible when one refused to be silenced. Local media picked up the story too. A well-known digital news site ran an article under the headline, "Community Advocates' Quiet Strength Prompts Bank Overhaul." The writer described Sarah's mocking question and Marcus's composed, yet firm response, noting how other customers had watched in stunned silence before rallying behind him. The article included quotes from the bank's CEO, pledging a renewed focus on diversity and inclusion, and from Marcus himself, who emphasized that respect should be the foundation of every service industry. The report carried photographs of the lobby's new signage, the community forum in progress, and Marcus speaking at the advocacy group's meeting. Social media shares poured in, many praising the way the incident had been handled and commending Marcus's dignified stand. Meanwhile, Sarah Donovan faced a difficult transition. She had been proud of her position at the bank, a stable job she believed would carry her through until retirement. Now, without that security, she confronted the harsh reality of unemployment. At home, she replayed the events in her mind, recognizing how a lapse in judgment had cost her everything she had worked for. She reached out to an old mentor from her college days, seeking advice on how to move forward. Her mentor urged her to engage in self-reflection, to understand the root of her prejudice, and to seek education on diversity issues. Sarah agreed, even as she worried about explaining her termination to friends and family. She felt remorse not only for losing her job but for the pain she had caused Marcus and the wider community. In the following weeks, Marcus received a formal invitation from the bank's CEO to attend a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly launched Customer Respect Initiative. The event was scheduled for a Friday morning at the bank's regional headquarters. Local dignitaries, community leaders, and press representatives were expected. Marcus accepted, recognizing it as an opportunity to reinforce the message that respect must be more than a sign on the door. It had to be lived every day. When the day arrived, he wheeled into a brightly lit atrium filled with guests. He joined the CEO at the podium. The CEO spoke about how a single act of courage could prompt lasting change, praising Marcus's calm and constructive approach. Then Marcus addressed the audience himself, thanking the bank for listening and underscoring that respect was not a favor, but a right. Sarah, on her part, enrolled in an online course on cultural competency and bias awareness. She also started volunteering at a local charity, hoping to rebuild both her resume and her sense of purpose. She wrote a letter to Marcus through a mediator to apologize sincerely. She described how ashamed she felt and how much she regretted her words. She asked for any guidance he might offer on becoming a more understanding person. Marcus, ever measured, replied that true learning required humility and openness. He suggested books and films that portrayed diverse experiences and invited her to attend one of the advocacy group's workshops, should she feel ready. Whether she took him up on that offer remained to be seen, but his response exemplified the power of combining firmness with forgiveness. As months passed, Unity Trust Bank's reforms became a model for other institutions. The bank's annual report highlighted the new training programs, quoting statistics on customer satisfaction improvements and decreased complaints. Employee surveys showed greater awareness of unconscious bias, and several branches reported more positive customer interactions. At the community center, Marcus noticed that people mentioned the bank's changes as evidence that speaking up, calmly and with evidence, could lead to real-world impact. In his talks and articles, he recounted the entire journey, the insult at the counter, the hushed reactions of onlookers, the manager's swift intervention, the bank's apology, Sarah's termination, and the broader reforms. He stressed that dignity and perseverance could transform a single hurtful moment into a wave of progress. In retrospect, that ordinary Tuesday afternoon had become extraordinary. A simple banking errand had revealed both the fragility of respect and the strength of principled action. Marcus's refusal to respond with anger, choosing instead to speak facts and file a complaint, set in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. For Unity Trust Bank, it meant examining and overhauling its culture. For Sarah Donovan, it meant facing the consequences of her words and embarking on a path of self-improvement. For the community, it became a reminder that prejudice could be challenged effectively and respectfully. And for Marcus himself, it only reinforced the lesson he had long taught. When confronted with injustice, dignity, and calm resolve are often the most powerful tools we possess. 2. Months had passed since that unforgettable day at the bank. The weather had changed, leaves had turned, and life in the city had gone on. But for Marcus Henderson, things would never quite be the same again. What started as a regular visit to his local bank had become a story shared in schools, offices, and online platforms. People talked about it not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest and because it showed how calm courage could challenge disrespect in a meaningful way. Marcus was back at the community center on a quiet Thursday afternoon, preparing for one of his weekly mentorship sessions. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper, and the sound of distant chatter echoed from the hallway. He looked out the window for a moment, watching children ride bicycles near the sidewalk, their laughter filling the air. He smiled softly. He often thought about the future, about the world those children would grow up in. If one thoughtful response could lead to change in a bank, What could happen if more people stood up calmly and clearly for what was right? A gentle knock at the door brought him back to the moment. A young volunteer stepped in, holding a stack of letters. "Mr. Henderson," she said kindly, "these just came in for you." He thanked her and began reading through them. Many were thank you notes. One came from a teacher who had used Marcus's story to teach her students about fairness and self-control. Another came from a small bank in another town. They had started their own respect promise after reading about Unity Trust's changes. One card, hand-drawn with colored pencils, was from a boy who had seen Marcus speak at a school assembly. It showed a man in a wheelchair smiling under a bright sun, with the words, "Thank you for being brave," written in large letters. These gestures warmed Marcus's heart. He didn't do what he did to become known. In fact, he often preferred to stay out of the spotlight. But he also knew that stories, real stories, had power. They stayed in people's minds longer than rules or lectures. They reached places that policies alone couldn't touch. And if his story could help someone feel seen, heard, or inspired to speak up, then it was worth every moment of discomfort he had experienced that day in the bank. Meanwhile, Unity Trust Bank continued to live up to its promises. The Customer Respect Initiative had grown into something bigger. New hires went through full-day workshops that included real-life examples like Marcus's story. Role-playing sessions were introduced, where staff practiced how to help customers with different needs, whether it was a disability, a language barrier, or even just someone having a bad day. Managers were trained to watch not just for customer service mistakes, but also for signs of unfair behavior. The bank became known not just for its financial services, but also for its commitment to respect and fairness. At one of their training events, Marcus was invited once again to speak. This time, he wasn't just a guest. He had helped design part of the training program. He stood at the front of a conference room full of employees, all wearing name badges and holding notebooks. Some looked nervous, others looked curious. Marcus told them about that day, not in a bitter way, but in a way that helped them understand how words can either lift someone up or push them down. He ended his talk by saying, "You don't have to know everything about someone to treat them kindly. You just have to remember that everyone deserves dignity." The room was silent for a moment, then filled with quiet applause, not loud or forced, just sincere. Later, during a coffee break, one of the younger employees approached Marcus. She said, "My brother uses a wheelchair. I used to think people just needed to be strong and ignore rude comments. But your story made me realize it's not about ignoring. It's about standing up in the right way." Marcus nodded, grateful. These were the moments that mattered most to him, the quiet ones where learning took place heart to heart. Sarah Donovan, whose words had sparked the chain of events, was also on her own path. She didn't disappear or fade away. After her dismissal, she spent time learning and listening. She finished her courses, volunteered at the community center for a short while, and kept reading. She stayed out of the spotlight, not because she was hiding, but because she was working on herself. One day, much later, she sent Marcus another letter, this one not asking for anything, just sharing how she had changed. She told him how she'd started a blog to help others reflect on their biases, how she'd spoken at her church about learning from mistakes, and how she hoped he was doing well. Marcus read the letter and nodded to himself. He didn't need to write back this time. Her words said enough. As the year came to an end, Unity Trust Bank held a small celebration to mark the progress they'd made. They called it Voices of Change and invited customers and staff to come together. Marcus attended, as did several people from his community center. There was no big speech this time, just people sharing stories, offering thanks, and talking about what they had learned. A quiet slideshow played in the background, showing moments from the past few months. Smiling customers, staff in training, kids drawing posters about kindness. Marcus stood near the back, watching it all unfold. He didn't need the microphone. His story had already done its work. And as he looked around at the faces in the room, people of all ages, backgrounds, and experiences, he felt something deeper than pride. He felt hope. He knew that there would always be challenges, There would always be people who didn't understand, who said the wrong thing, or who acted unfairly. But he also knew that change was possible. Not overnight. Not with shouting, but with steady, honest, and respectful action. As the evening came to a close, a young man came up to Marcus and shook his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "You reminded all of us what dignity really looks like." Marcus smiled. "And you reminded me that it's never wasted," he replied. Then, with a soft hum from his wheelchair, he turned toward the door, rolled out into the cool evening air, and headed home. Not just as a man who had faced something difficult, but as someone who had helped the world become a little more fair, a little more kind, and a lot more aware.